Hi, thank you. So the question I want to ask, again, relates to sort of a sense of personal responsibility, but more in regards to the individual. This is quite hard for me to admit because I'm used to people not knowing it, because I've improved over time. So I had really bad autism as a child. I know, you're surprised. And I'm not going to exaggerate it, I want to put it in perspective. It was never the case that I didn't learn how to sort of talk, and I had real problems with empathy, I still do, and I've kind of learned how to improve that over time, but that was a real big barrier for me. People often look at me and assume that the biggest barrier for me was being a woman or being ethnic minority. No, it was that, and it was really hard to adjust to that. But looking at your book and looking at your lectures, it kind of reminded me a lot of how the way I was brought up by a very strong grandmother who said, no, don't let that get in the way, don't sort of wait for the world to end whilst you kind of sit in self-pity. You kind of got to take responsibility for yourself, and that's kind of inspired a lot of my own ethos, and I'll try and tell people, well, no, the individual, it does have a sense of personal responsibility. It doesn't mean they're to blame, it's just, a sense of kind of responding to what's beset them, and that's how I've kind of lived my life, and it's the reason why I've come here and managed to study literature was about communication in a way, so for me it shows how much I've improved over my life. But the thing is, when I kind of tell this to people, they seem to want to dismiss this idea of personal responsibility, and I'll even get responses like, well, it was easy for you, but you can't judge other people because it wasn't easy for them. First mistake with that was that it wasn't easy for me. It was very difficult, actually, and it still is in some senses. And the second problem with that is that it's actually quite empowering to have a sense of personal responsibility, because otherwise you're kind of just like laying there at the bottom, not really doing anything. That's actually quite oppressive. But why is it that people are so scared to admit that there's such a thing as personal responsibility? Thank you, by the way.
Well, I've thought for a long time. So imagine, here's two possibilities. So one is, you really don't matter. Nothing you do matters. You're just an insignificant and short-lived creature on an insignificant suburban planet out in the middle of nowhere, and what the hell difference is it going to make in a million years anyways? Okay, so and you think, well, that's kind of hopeless, nihilistic. It's like, yeah, but there's an upside. You don't have any responsibility because nothing you do matters. It's like the price you pay is that fundamentally your life is meaningless, but the advantage is, hey, anything goes. The alternative is, no, everything you do matters. You actually play a role in determining the destiny of experience itself, and it's an important role, but everything you do matters, and that responsibility is on you. And so what you gain from that is, well, you gain meaning, but the price you pay is responsibility. Now you say, well, okay, pick one. You can pick one or the other. Well, so sometimes people pick meaninglessness and lack of responsibility because it's easy. You just have to do nothing. And there you are. You've accomplished it. And so that's what you face when people say, well, it was easy for you. It's like, first of all, it's not easy for anyone. It's like, really, have you ever met anyone that you actually know for whom it was easy? I mean, I know there's hierarchies of difficulty. I mean, I've met people whose lives were so difficult that, well, it's like black humor. I mean, it's terrible. Well, my daughter, when she's gone to talk to people about what life was like for her for about 5 years when she was a teenager, gone to talk to physiotherapists and people like that, and she has them in stitches, partly because the things that happened to her are so awful that they have an element, it's like they're surreal, And I know some people have unbelievably difficult lives. There's hierarchies of difficulty, but I've never met anyone who had it easy. Life is actually quite difficult, and people are burdened by, well, I mean, what? But none of you have any painful inadequacies? Jesus, you're just rife with them. And the probability that other people are going to exploit them and that you are ashamed of them is 100%, and that you have to overcome them. It's this delusion that resentful people have is, well, out there somewhere, there's someone who had it easy, and we're going to fix that. It's like, and I've met lots of extremely successful people. And, you just have to scratch under the surface for like 15 minutes and you find out that their lives have been tragic in all sorts of ways. They had a brutal father, they have a son who's a schizophrenic, their wife has some chronic illness, they have trouble at the workplace that's of a non-trivial nature, they're facing their own health issues. I mean, life is brutally difficult. And so I don't know where we get this idea that some people have it easy, even though some people do sometimes have it easier than other people. And a lot of it is avoidance of responsibility. And you don't need to explain that. Why would people avoid responsibility? Well, why would you sit in a chair instead of doing like 10 bench presses of 150 pounds? And the answer is, well, to sit in the chair, you just have to do this. It's easy. Well, it's the same with abdication of responsibility. It doesn't require any explanation. It's the default position. And if you're the sort of person who's likely to do that, then you're also the sort of person that's likely to be very annoyed at people who don't do that, because they stand in judgment of you by their mere fact of their existence. And so that's one of the ugliest things that's at the bottom of the victim-victimizer narrative shtick. It's hatred for those who have pulled themselves out of the mire by their own devices. And I'm also never claim, it's like, well, I don't care how bad you have it, if you just try hard enough, you can get out of it. It's like, no, obviously not. Sometimes you're dying. And the best you can do is to manage that with some dignity. You're not going to get out of it. None of you are going to get out of that eventually, no matter how hard you try. So it's not like trying solves everything. It's like, got a better solution? It's the best you've got. It's the best you've got. And as you pointed out so carefully, it's like, well, it imbues you with a sense of purpose and a certain amount of dignity. And that's something, while you're struggling along foolishly, to think at least that you're bearing up underneath it with some degree of commitment and courage. It doesn't mean the suffering will go away. It doesn't mean your problems disappear. But at least there's something to you. You have the admiration that goes along with the observation that you can bear a burden. I think that's what people have in the final analysis. That's what we have to set against the suffering of life and the malevolence. We have the observation that we can bear a burden and all the nobility that comes along with that. And you might think, well, that's faint reward. It's like, no, it's not actually. It's quite something to have that, to develop that kind of respect, to see that you can face up to the terrible realities of life and you can still stand underneath that weight. It shows you what a human being is. And that's really something. It's made me tremendously optimistic, all the terrible things that I've encountered in my clinical practice and my personal life and in my reading. It's made me unbelievably optimistic. I think people are unbelievably tough and rife with a potential that's in some manner infinite in its scope. And from that we can draw the strength to deal with the catastrophes of our life. And so, and I think that's the central message of the fundamental stories of the West, and not only the West, but terrible as things are, we're stronger, especially in truth, especially with the adoption of responsibility. And I see that evidence for that manifest itself all the time. So good for you, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.